Hello. Welcome to Season XV of the Horrific Podcast. We're two friends who live in different places but share a love for scary movies. In each episode, we both watch the same movie on our own and then record a conversation together about what we liked, what we hated, if we were scared, and maybe even some larger truths about why people watch horror movies in the first place. This season, we're watching movies from the 90s and talking about how they fit into the larger picture of 90s horror and how each year from that decade stacks up against the others. Thanks for joining us, and we hope you enjoy the episode. Well, here we are. Second movie from 1999, which is the last year of the 1990s. Which means we have completed the initial leg of our quest through the 90s to find the lost and forgotten horror movies that weren't sequels or remakes or movies we'd already talked about.
It made under a certain amount, right? Didn't we do that?
Oh, yeah. And also that made under $100 million at the box office. So we're looking for the unsung heroes of the 90s.
Yep.
Does it feel real to you that we're at the end?
It does, but I'm almost a little bummed out about it.
We should just go straight into the 2000s. Keep the season going for literally ever.
Keep the dream alive.
Yeah. I don't think we should do that. I think change is
too
good.
Much work.
But
it's too much work.
So. Yeah, we bent the rules, though, a little bit last week when we did Sleepy Hollow, because it made a lot of money at the box office.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I might have overcorrected this year, or this week. Because we watched a movie called Ravenous that barely made any money at the box office.
Was it like an indie flick?
I don't know.
Yeah.
It was not a very big budget. And so I would assume it was kind of outside the main Hollywood system.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a weird one. Did you have any exposure? Like, had you ever even heard of this one?
No, not one time, actually.
Same. And I actually was having a hard time coming up with 1999 movies that we hadn't talked about.
Oh, man.
That were available for streaming. Because we have covered a lot of 99, and most of the ones that, either didn't meet our criteria or just weren't available for streaming. So this was one that I found after going through lots of options. And Wikipedia called it a horror comedy Western cannibal film.
Mm-hmm.
Which, how could you not watch that?
Right. You got to just know for science alone.
Exactly.
What that is about.
Yeah, like what does that combination of words describe?
Yeah.
And also Deputy Dewey Riley from Scream was in this one. So
it's true.
Had some stuff working for
it. Dewey, I think his name was Dewey, was also in this from it wasn't Dewey Crow, never mind. But it was, I just ruined it.
Well, it was a nice attempt. So yeah, this week we're going to end the episode talking about where 1999 ranks in comparison to all the other years from the 90s based on what we've watched this season. But before we do that, I'll do a quick introduction and then we can get into the cannibals don't eat clowns because they taste funny details. That was my attempt at like a horror comedy pun Western cannibal joke.
That's perfect.
In 1999, 20th Century Fox brought us Ravenous, a psychological cannibal horror film set in the late 1800s. This movie tells the story of a disgraced army officer named Lieutenant Boyd who finds himself in the middle of a cannibalistic conspiracy after being reassigned to a remote army base in the winter in the Sierra Nevada mountains. As he learns more about what's happening, Boyd must make a difficult decision between his own life and giving in to his darkest impulses. This movie was a box office flop and only made about $2 million against a budget of around $12 million. It can currently be rented for streaming on Amazon Prime Video.
It's like 50 cents cheaper there, for the record, than iTunes.
Oh, nice.
I just want to point that out, or it was when I rented it, because I was like, what? 50 cents?
Yeah.
What a weird discount.
Yeah. This movie, I didn't know what to expect from it after having read the description initially, just kind of like the blurb on IMDb. And when it started, it almost had kind of a feeling of like a 70s Western, as far as kind of the flashbacks to the Mexican-American War and stuff. Like even like the film quality and the acting kind of matched that more so than what I would normally expect from a movie from 1999.
Yeah.
But I guess that's just kind of because of the low budget.
Yeah, it reminded me. I just watched The Alamo with John Wayne, and like for some reason, it just that specific scene kind of kept taking me back to that.
Yeah, I could see that for sure.
Yeah.
One thing that did not remind me of 70s Westerns, the sound effects and music in this one did not match the movie whatsoever. Like, to me, it sounded like they were using like the Van Wilder sound effect board or something. Like it was so weird. And the music was not appropriate to the time period at all for most of the movie. And it was just really kind of confusing that all of these sounds were happening that felt much more like modern movies, but in what looked like much more of an older movie.
So like the sound effects happening, like when I punch you, that punch sound, is that what you mean? Okay. Yeah. I agree with that for sure. I think with the soundtrack piece of it, I was thinking like this was by design because it was like overwhelming. In my opinion, like my senses, like I was just sensory overload when that was going, and I was like, mission accomplished, motherfuckers. Like this is stressing me out just from this, not in a bad way. Like it was doing the job I felt like they were trying, because it was just like layered sounds and music going on top of each other, and it was like kind of tripping me out for a little bit.
It seemed like it was meant to make you feel very uncomfortable.
Specifically the scene where they go to the cave for the first time, like that scene where they're like in the cave trying to figure out what's going on at the beginning. That scene is the one that affected me the most. All others I don't have that strong of opinion on, but that one I was just like, because like the actor was like doing all these weird things like with his hands, and it's a comedy, so you don't know if it's supposed to be funny, but then like this weird music's playing, and like this guy's down in a cave like trying to figure out what's going on, and it was definitely overwhelming. That's the one that was like, okay, that was mission accomplished. If you were trying to make this as like overwhelming as possible, adding that music to it just killed me.
It reminded me a little bit of some of the Giallo movies that we watched.
Yeah, I can see that.
And I feel like those had kind of the same thing, where it was like the really weird, off-putting music, but also mixed super loud compared to everything else. So, yeah.
Or like, yeah, Giallo is definitely a good example. Or like some of the 70s exploitation films have that too, where it was almost like, I don't think they did it on purpose, but because like they just couldn't master audio
right
that well, it was just like all of a sudden you'd have like a really high like screeching sound, or like a siren sound happening, and you're like, that's way too loud, like I can't hear what they're talking about right now, because it's trying to, I guess, make you have sensory overload. But I don't know.
Yeah, I think it was effective and that was one reason why in the intro I called this psychological, even though I don't feel like that was as much in any of the descriptions that I read, just because it seemed like it was trying to mess with your head, and it was really trying to make you get in that feeling of, would I eat another person if I knew it would make me survive?
That's
or
true. Yeah.
if I knew it would get me out of this like dangerous situation. And so in the Wikipedia description didn't help, narrow this down whatsoever. So in trying to think about like how is this horror, or like how is it trying to be scary, or what's the lens that we can use to think about this movie and what it was trying to do, I didn't really pick up on the horror comedy so much. To me, it really felt a lot like a vampire movie with some slightly different details.
Mm. Yeah.
And because you have kind of the idea of, well, we have the vampires who are like this closed community and they're trying to turn more people to be like them. But then they're also trying to like set traps so that the larger world doesn't know that they exist. But then there's also the trope of vampire movies of the guy who's like morally opposed to sucking blood. So he's trying to like find a way to not do it, or decide, am I just going to let myself starve to death? And if you look at it through that lens, I think this movie is kind of like a classic vampire movie in a lot of ways that like horror tropes are used.
Yeah. And I'll go one further with that too, because if it was just about cannibals, I don't think that they would give near the shit that they gave on if this guy was a cannibal or not. I felt like
a
huge chunk of this film. But like if it's a vampire, like I could see them trying to do that to build their, clan or whatever the case is. Like that's the, well, you already are one of us. You need to do this more so you can keep living, kind of thing. Like that's why I feel like that's also why I feel like it's more about the vampire, and that's just what I thought while watching this like throughout the film. I was like, this is basically like, it seems like almost like where vampires could have started from, kind of thing, because you get stronger when you do it, all those like aspects, magical things happen when you eat someone, and it's like taking their soul away, I think is what they were saying in the film. And kind of similar with vampires too, but
yeah, it kind of seemed like, and this is going to sound awful, but by the end of this movie, I was like, I mean, would it be that bad? Because they really were selling the benefits this whole movie about like,
I was sold like 3/4 in.
Yeah, the guy's like, well, I was dying of tuberculosis, but then I, took one bite of human and was good to go. And you have all these people just recovering from these terrible diseases and stuff. And I'm like, well, if somebody was dead anyway, would it be so bad?
Well, yeah. My thought about the whole thing, because like I was because my thought was like, well, that doesn't mean you have to kill someone. You know that there's going to be some form of like vegetarian out there that doesn't want to do it. Just wait until they die from natural causes and just eat them.
Well, especially out there in the mountains like that, people were dying left and right back then.
That's a good point. That's an even better point, actually. Yeah, what's the life expectancy out there? 38, probably.
On a good run.
It's like, it's like all you got to do is wait 2 winters, and this. Look at that guy. He's got a limp. That means he's goner now.
Yeah, his days are numbered. Yeah,
he's got sniffles. If he's not going to drink his urine, then we can't do anything for him. That's basically how it was back then.
Yeah, and so then I guess like the extra element though that was added on it was this idea of the Wendigo, which I think has come up in, I can't remember which Stephen King movie we watched, but I kind of tied this back into some of the other like fairy tale horror or like folk horror type movies from the 90s. Because if you were to think about, the Leprechaun or Sleepy Hollow or Rumpelstiltskin or Pinocchio, I guess the Wendigo is maybe in a little bit different category because it's more like legend. But it is also sort of like this story that gets told and passed down over time. And then we're taking that idea and giving it, sort of the 90s movie treatment. So I guess it kind of fits in addition to like following vampire tropes. It also kind of fits that trend from the 90s.
That's true. That's a good point. Pet Sematary.
Yes, that was the one.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. That's a good point. I actually didn't put 2 and 2 together with that because I was just like, this is straight vamp, It's just what's my thought. Now, the other piece that you're kind of talking about a bit ago was like the comedy aspect. Like we didn't see too much of that, and I agree. except for one scene when he's falling down the hill.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I think that was extended for comedy purposes. Because, like, it was just, like, over the top. Like, he was just, ooh. Like, I think that was, like, kind of a slapstick comedy, like, trope, I guess. So that was like, oh, this is why you could have just cut it down.
Yeah.
But, yeah, I guess there were a couple scenes that you kind of, there were a couple scenes I did kind of chuckle at, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I kind of wondered how intentional the actually funny scenes were, though, compared to the ones they were going for. But
I think the falling down one, because I was like, oh, I get what they're doing, so I thought that was kind of funny. But then when Colquhoun, if that's how you pronounce it, and Private Trotters are at the cave, and like Colquhoun's doing the weird things with the hands and the music's going, and all of a sudden this Private Trotter, he just throws his gun down and like lets out like a yelp kind of thing, and just takes off running.
Yeah.
And he's just like still screaming as he's running across. I don't know, like it didn't seem scary or like he was like in trouble. It was just like he had just slapped his older brother and took off running, kind of thing. Right. It was just like, yo, dude, you're about dead.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And I feel like most of that type of stuff was closer to the beginning. Because for me, about like 45 minutes in, this movie had kind of a big shift in like the tone and what it was doing and the pace and everything else. Because it seemed like for a while, it was all built up. It was kind of building the backstory. It was introducing all the screw ups that had also been assigned to this fort. And then you had the story of the guy who wanders in at night, and he's kind of telling about this terrible experience that he had. And everything felt very in the realm of the natural at that point. Like it was all just kind of, I guess, introducing you to the characters, kind of getting you into the scene, building the relationships between them. And then you kind of think at that point that the movie's going to be about, oh, these people went through this terrible experience where one of the guys became a killer and was taking, murdering other people to eat and whatever. And a lot of things about the story didn't really make sense, but it's like, okay, we're going to go have this showdown with, is it Colonel Ives or Captain Ives or whatever his name was? Mm-hmm. Colonel Ives and maybe like save the damsel in distress. And then once they get there, things changed a lot. Because like you were saying, I really feel like that scene where Calhoun was out there like moving his hands around and like you're starting to realize that no, he was the bad guy. And when they find all 5 skeletons and then one of them has, the Colonel Ives, like his identifier on it, then you realize, oh, they've been set up. And then the guy starts digging in the ground like a dog and like pulls out that knife. And you're like, oh no, this was all a setup. Like all of my assumptions about what's happening in this scene were wrong. This guy is this malevolent, evil presence. But even in that moment, you still didn't know if he was just a crazy person or if there was more going on. And then sort of from that point forward in the movie, it gets a lot more into that sort of, oh, now we're all in on the joke. Like now we all know this new thing about the world and that the cannibalism really does make you stronger and more resilient, but you have to keep doing it and the craving gets more. And then the rest of the movie from that point on is about figuring out, like, now as a person with morals who knows this and has the craving, how do I handle it? So it was like the first half of the movie was all just set up for what the movie actually wanted to be doing. And it was a little disorienting as it was happening. And you were kind of like reframing everything about what you assumed was the reality of the movie in your mind.
Yeah, I think, it was the scene that you just mentioned, and then the follow-up to that where I think it was where Boyd and I don't remember the other guy's name, Reich or something like that, where they were chasing after Colquhoun. Like that is when I noticed that there wasn't nearly as much humor in it. Like it definitely, like, the tone switched at that point when they're on the cliff and they fall. One of them dies and the other one falls down. Like that was the kind of turning point for this film. And from then on, I was like, okay, we're here for it. Up until then, it was definitely hit or miss for me because I was like, what are we doing here? Like, is this a legit? Like, the first part of it felt more like a comedy. You know, like he won this award because he, you know, took this fort by himself, but he did it because he played dead and let all his people in his party die. And then he was taken captive. I don't know. It was just more comical, but once it got to the cave, it was game on.
Yeah, for sure. And it really stayed a lot more intense after that too. Mm-hmm. And so,
yeah, because like you were saying though, it's because like you realize like, oh, this guy is like actually crazy. Like he is trying to like kill all these people, and that's the dude. Like that was a trap from the get-go, you know?
Yeah.
I think that was the turning page, yeah.
And I really liked the part of the movie where, you know, Colonel Ives shows up to be the new boss, and Boyd knows that he's this evil entity, but he can't convince anybody else of it. And so he's like stuck inside the fort in this super remote area with a person in power over him who he knows is this sort of supernatural evil. And the way that he was kind of like freaking out and following him around at night, and then the way that they would have the real conversations when other people weren't around, and just kind of that like duplicitous nature of Ives. I thought all that was really good from a horror perspective.
Yeah, because we're also learning, like I felt like we were learning more about it too, because that's when I kind of put two and two together when they're like, well, strip him down, and you're like, oh, they're not going to find any like cut or any shot that's happening because he healed himself from eating, you know, human flesh. So like it was like all the puzzle pieces were kind of falling into place then too. This movie was like the most like hot and cold movie I've ever watched. I enjoyed it. Like
I'm with you.
I did actually really enjoy it because I felt like the hot times were outweighed the cold times, and so to speak. But there were some scenes in it that were super gnarly, like super. I was jumping kind of thing. Like it was pretty intense. Putting yourself in those shoes, being in a remote area with, you know, any sort of lunatic, especially that one, Ives, so I'm talking about Culkin, but terrifying in itself too. But like it was just so hot and cold. Like I would be like, oh my God, this got really good. And then like 2 seconds later, you're like, wait, what? Like, what are we doing here? Oh, it's a dream.
Yes. And it also there were some real, very violent scenes in this one. Yeah. It definitely was not trying to be a made for all audiences movie. It was going for more of the horror vibe.
Yeah.
And the one other thing I wanted to talk to you about, and then I'm ready to get into the rankings if you are, but the ending, I mean, it like technically had kind of a happy ending because Boyd chose not to eat and to let himself die and to kind of like end the cycle of the curse and everything. Mm-hmm. And he took Ives out with him. But there was also the scene right before that where the general had arrived and hadn't seen any of what was going on and scooped himself a ladle full of Nox stew.
Yeah.
So you kind of have that remaining like, oh, but the infection lives on. Like this is going to dominate him now. And then more people are going to get pulled in again and stuff. Mm-hmm. And I don't know that they necessarily thought they were going to make a sequel. I think maybe they just wanted to give it that unresolved ending, which I thought was effective after everything else that had gone on. Because it was like Boyd makes this big, you know, moral decision to, you know, put an end to all this, and then it doesn't even matter.
Yeah, I think for me, it was strange how they did that. Like they had that scene where he ate the stew before, and then, you know, and then Boyd ends up killing Culkin. Mm-hmm.
But, yeah, they should have put that at the very end, right?
Yeah, that was the piece. But you know, because the way the movie ends, it's like, well, at the end of the day, I guess the point is, at the end of the day, if you can live with the choices you made, when you're gone, like the choice you made in life when you're gone, like, Boyd could die happy thinking it was going to end because he didn't know that the stew was eaten. But then my thought went to like, well, they're not going to know what that stew is made out of. So like, will that guy who ate the stew, is he just all of a sudden going to start craving like human flesh? And how does he know what that craving's like? I just put too much thought into it.
Yeah. Well, and I
accepted.
And again, that's where I don't think it was necessarily like setting it up for a sequel or anything. I think it just wanted to give you that last kind of unresolved stab, there at the end.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, overall, I was definitely like, I was curious about this when I was searching for it to watch. So I'm like, okay, because you see like if you look up on like iTunes, it has this description of what it is. If you on IMDb, it might say Western comedy, horror, all that, and then you look on iTunes and it's like drama, Western, and you're just like, what?
Yeah, right.
Like, what is happening? There's no universal decision there, but so generally, like at least with our history of films, when you run into those, it's like, well, either it's gonna be really good because it doesn't go into one specific genre, or it's gonna be really, really bad because they're just all over the place. And with this one, I thought it was actually in the middle, where it was like, it was good and bad in spots, but it was good.
I think we can agree it was an interesting watch.
It was worth it. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, 100% interesting. Yeah.
And if we were not doing this season and the theme of this season, I don't think this one would have ever showed up on my radar. So I'm gonna give us a win on this one.
Yeah, no, I think it absolutely is a win. I recommend people watch it. It's worth a watch for sure. I enjoyed watching this film.
Yeah, same. So
that was a good pick. Who picked that out? I did.
It's hard to say.
I think you cheated with Sleepy Hollow, if I'm remembering right. Just kidding.
Yeah. But this means we got a pretty strong showing for 1999.
We did.
Because including this one and previous seasons, the movies from 1999 that we've watched are The Blair Witch Project, Audition, The Haunting, Terror Firmer, Sleepy Hollow, and Ravenous. Some of those are better than others, but I think we would both agree that like Blair Witch Project, Sleepy Hollow, and this are all pretty good movies.
Yeah, yeah.
And I feel like I remember Audition being pretty okay.
Which one was Audition? Was that the Japanese one? Did we ever watch the Japanese one?
Yes, it was.
Okay. Yeah, that was good. Yeah, because it was like I remember that one. That was good. I liked it.
Yeah. I mean, it was weird, but it was disturbing. Yeah, I mean, it's what you want out of a horror movie.
I also said I liked it without actually remembering it to people who could just listen to the episode and be like, hey, you actually didn't like it?
Yeah.
But I want to say I like it because I remember it was like, like a helper and like the family was involved in a way. Yeah.
Nobody's going to go back to check us on this. So it doesn't
that's
matter.
True.
But yeah. And then Terra Firma is, what a trip. So anyway.
Yeah. What a guy.
Yeah. With 1999, I mean, what are your first thoughts? Like, where in the list of the 90s movies? I mean, do you think it's kind of towards the top? Do you think it's more of a middle?
I think it's upper middle.
Okay. So if we compare it to like Bad Moon, Pinocchio, From Dusk Till Dawn, Scream, and Mars Attacks, we going over or under on that?
What do you? I would say over. What would you say?
I'd say it's hard, but probably.
Blair Witch is just so. Blair Witch just changed the game.
Yeah. I mean, I feel like I'm okay with saying that for now, which would actually put it in number 3.
Yeah.
But would you put it above People Under the Stairs, Silence of the Lambs, Dead Space, and Ernest Scared Stupid?
No.
Okay.
Mm-mm.
So that means we've got it in number 3 right now.
Really
but it's
like
also,
yeah.
I feel like it's also a little bit unfair because we're pretty unbalanced. Because for 1999, we've got 6 movies that we've watched. For 1996, which is right behind it, we've got 5. For 1991, we've got 4. For 97, we have 4. But then if we look at like 1994, we only reviewed 2 movies. And if we look at, for example, 95, we have 3 movies, but one of them was Rumpelstiltskin and the other was a Western. So I kind of feel like we might need to go back and supplement this just a little bit.
Well, I agree with you. Only because of one reason.
Okay.
It's our goddamn podcast.
And so we will do whatever the hell we want.
You're damn right. We get the mic. We control what we're doing here. And I support you 100%, so I'm in.
Okay. So I would like to propose that for the next couple of weeks, we go back and look at some of these years where we've only watched a couple of movies and find one more to fit in. And maybe we relax like the $100 million budget thing. Yeah. And I only say that just because in previous seasons, we didn't have that constraint and we're counting movies from those seasons.
That's a good point. And it's also like, I mean, like in the research for some of these years, like there's not a lot that we had as an option that would be worth it. Yeah. That weren't like a 0.2 rating on the, Yeah. So I think we need to definitely up that for sure.
Yeah. So looking through the list, I think maybe 4-ish more weeks, and then we will get into the final reassessment of the 90s. How's that sound?
Yeah, I think it's great.
Cool. Well, thank you, anyone who is still listening, and hope you like the 90s because we got another month of it.
And don't dream it's over, because guess what might happen in 4 weeks? We might say we're going to do this again.
Or we might pop right into the 2000s.
Or 80s. We're whimsical like that. Does that work?
Could you imagine?
That'd be nice.
And that's it for today's episode. If you've listened this far, then thank you, and we hope you've enjoyed it. We're always looking for new ideas, so if you have any questions, comments, or movie suggestions, please send us an email at thehorrificpod@gmail.com. Or hit us up on the IG. That's what the kids call Instagram. Just search for The Horrific Podcast. Thanks for listening.